Greetings, friends. You are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine as of March 21st, 2025. A tremendous number of events have occurred today, so let's get started. Before we begin, I would sincerely like to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps support its growth. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed. Over the past 24 hours and throughout these days, the Russian army has been launching massive strikes on Odessa to destroy as many drone production centers and weapon depots as possible, which could otherwise end up on the front lines. If we look at the number of updates since March 1st, the number of various icons here is off the charts. Strikes are regularly carried out with Iskanders, Gerans, drones, and unmanned aerial vehicles. I also remind you that over the past month, there have been many strikes on the town of Kropyvnytsky. As a result of the latest raid, an entire trainload of equipment was destroyed. A large number of strikes have also been carried out on Kryvyi Rih throughout this month. Here, strikes were aimed at temporary deployment points. Additionally, according to pro-Russian sources, footage of explosions and the aftermath of strikes on various headquarters has been published. A significant number of strikes, of course, have also been carried out on the city of Dnipro. Footage of objective control is being published, showing the explosions themselves, the strikes, and so on. That is, the Russian side is currently maximally focused on destroying as many warehouses, logistics, and other areas responsible for the material supply of the Ukrainian armed forces units as possible. Next, we will move to the Sloviansk, Kramatorsk sector of the front. Here, towns such as Siversk, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and Constantinovka are located. Some of these towns have already come under the control of the Russian armed forces. In essence, this Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration was referred to as the heart of the Donbass Arc operation back in 2022. This is where Russian units were initially directed, as gaining control over these towns would allow the Russian Federation to achieve several objectives set at the beginning of this special military operation. Over the past 24 hours, a large amount of footage has been published showing strikes with Iskanders and FABs on the positions of Ukrainian armed forces units in two towns, as well as on the SBU building and the positions of individual brigades responsible for special operations in this sector of the front. Here, we can observe another Iskander strike on Kramatorsk, where, according to pro-Russian sources, the command center of the tactical group Luhansk was located. As a result of the strike, the Ukrainian armed forces lost 25 officers. Additionally, 30 guards may have been buried under the rubble following the strike on this town. Overall, if we look at the number of updates since January 1st, 2025, we can conclude that Sloviansk and Kramatorsk have been subjected to the highest number of strikes this year, with strikes occurring almost daily. The increased activity and strong focus of Russian units on these two towns suggest that something significant may be planned for this sector in the near future. Today, Valery Gerasimov is visiting the area of responsibility of the center group of troops for the second time this year. The last time he was in the area of responsibility at the headquarters of the center group of troops was in January 2025, a little less than 3 months ago. Now he has arrived for a repeat visit. It is possible that today Gerasimov was given the latest instructions, orders, and maps on how the Russian group of troops should operate in this sector of the front. If we turn to the footage of objective control and everything that has happened over the past 24 hours, we can say that the Russian army is gradually breaking through the defenses of the Ukrainian armed forces along the H-32 highway. Today, the first footage of objective control from the town of Tarasivka was published. In this footage, published by pro-Russian sources, we can observe close combat and contact between Ukrainian and Russian units on the southern outskirts of this village. Based on this footage, we have made a small map update, showing that the fighting is gradually moving into Tarasivka. After Tarasivka, the next town will be Novo-Olenivka, which is essentially a suburb of Konstantinovka and the beginning of the formation of a cauldron for Ukrainian units located south of the Kleban-Bytek reservoir. Next, we move to the town of Toretsk. Despite attempts by the Ukrainian armed forces in late May and early February to stabilize the situation and push back Russian units, the Russian side managed to stabilize the situation, defeat the Ukrainian units that had entered Toretsk, and push them back into open terrain. The fighting for Toretsk is nearing its conclusion. Of course, there are still questions regarding the Zabalka neighborhood. It is possible that the Ukrainian armed forces maintain some presence here, but overall, the northern part of the town is of greater significance to the Russian side. At the moment, the Russian army is actively continuing its advance along the 05 to 19 highway towards the town of Delivka. Just a few days ago, another wave of the offensive began, and during the first wave, the Russian army managed to significantly expand its zone of control in this sector of the front. Currently, no geolocations confirming further progress have been published, but it is possible that clearing operations and regrouping are underway. After a brief pause, the Russian army will likely continue to move forward. In the area of the town of Chasiv Yar, some pro-Russian mapping services have noted further advances by Russian units in the Shevchenko neighborhood. In fact, some pro-Russian experts claim that this neighborhood is already 50% under control, and Russian units are continuing to clear the area. If this information regarding the Shevchenko neighborhood proves to be true, then it can be confidently stated that Ukrainian units, which were essentially abandoned in the area of Stavka Dniprovskoho and the central part of Chasiv Yar, have been encircled. Breaking out of this encirclement will now be extremely difficult, especially since time is currently working in favor of the Russian units that have breached the defenses. With each passing day, the tactical positions of the Ukrainian units will worsen, and their chances of a successful breakout or favorable outcome will diminish. Next, we move to the Siversk sector of the front, where increased activity by Russian units has also been noted along the road through Fedorivka, Perezna, Kuzminivka, and further towards Siversk. Here, Russian artillery is primarily at work, striking positions of the Ukrainian armed forces. Overall, it seems that the Russian army is gradually preparing for possible assault operations. I remind you that there is a channel called Operational Space, which today continued to surprise us with reports from the West group of troops. Several more maps and articles were published regarding the current situation unfolding around the town of Yampil. According to some sources who claim to have connections with the West group of troops, they understand and see the general state of affairs in this direction. It is reported that Russian units continue to improve their positions around Yampil, gradually encircling the town. I repeat, if this information is indeed confirmed, and we eagerly await additional news from this sector of the front, then it can already be stated that the town of Siversk is gradually falling into a semi-encirclement. We can see this salient, and we see how convenient it is for the Russian army to advance both from south to north and from north to south, towards towns such as Sviatopokrovska. Here, every kilometer will play a significant role, and sooner or later, the Siversk direction may gradually transform into the Svatove direction, where, at some point, after the Russian army establishes full control over the supply routes, the fate of the Ukrainian armed forces grouping on the Svatove salient will be instantly decided. Again, if we draw an analogy with the current situation, it is worth taking another look at what is unfolding on the Svatove salient. Today, a very interesting video was published by the Ukrainian armed forces. Apparently, the video was filmed last night. In this footage, we can observe Ukrainian units attempting to evacuate, retreat, and essentially flee from the Svatove direction. We see a vehicle leaving from the direction of the town of Hoholivka. As the car was driving away from Hoholivka, several drones struck the vehicle. Here we see a border crossing, and we see a Ukrainian soldier trying to shoot down everything flying in the sky. But apparently, something goes wrong, and another drone hits the Ukrainian pickup truck. However, we can see that the damage inflicted on the pickup truck has not yet completely destroyed it, and the Ukrainians begin to retreat from this crossing. The final part of the video shows us the conditions in which the Ukrainian armed forces units had to fight on the Svatove salient. As the vehicle drives, we can count dozens of pieces of equipment scattered along the roadside so as not to obstruct movement in this direction. Dozens of pieces of equipment were destroyed, and this is the kind of situation that Russian units are now trying to create around the town of Siversk. If we return once again to the Svatove direction, there is information that the lost equipment of the Ukrainian armed forces has been geolocated and physically counted. Today, according to certain sources specializing in loss calculations, it was determined that since the beginning of hostilities in the Svatove direction, the UAF has lost over 1,000 units of equipment. Over 1,000. This is a colossal, catastrophic loss. And now, I repeat, a similar situation is being attempted around the town of Siversk. Also of interest are the footage published today from the Svatove gas distribution station. Today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported in its latest update that during their retreat, Ukrainian units destroyed the gas transportation system. I remind you that this is an extremely serious crime in terms of the agreements reached between US President Donald Trump, Putin, and Zelensky. But today we see that someone did not keep their word. The Ministry of Defense has published information stating that the strike and destruction of this transportation system, this energy infrastructure facility, was carried out by Ukrainian formations. So this is the situation unfolding here, slightly to the south, in the Belgorod region, where hostilities continue. Despite the fact that most of the footage we receive still comes from the border area, there are videos of strikes on UAF equipment attempting to cross the state border of the Russian Federation and reach towns like Demidovka. So far, the UAF has not succeeded, although last evening, closer to 9 to 10 p.m. Moscow time, some pro-Russian experts began publishing information that despite the losses and the lack of significant success for Ukrainian units, some groups, units, or even battalions may have managed to secure a foothold on the outskirts of border towns. Primarily, this refers to the town of Demidovka. To summarize, it is possible that today, March 21st, despite the catastrophic losses suffered by the Ukrainian armed forces in this direction, some units may have managed to seize the first town in the Belgorod region, Demidovka. But we will, of course, monitor how the situation develops further. If Ukraine continues to suffer such losses, it is unlikely that they will be able to hold Demidovka for long. However, other pro-Russian experts noted today that this maneuver and attack in the Belgorod direction allowed some Ukrainian units to slow down the Russian advance towards the town of Guyevo, as the Russian command decided to redeploy some FPV drone operators from Guyevo to Gradovka and Nadezhdovka to stabilize the situation. Currently, there is a noted slowdown in the advance of Russian units on the southern flank of the Svatove salient, in the area of villages such as Guyevo, Gornyal, and Alexandria. This is primarily due to the fact that the main part of the units, after completing the main phase of combat operations in the Svatove salient, was redeployed to other sectors of the front. Now let's move to the northern Kupyansk direction, where information continues to come in that the armed forces of the Russian Federation are gradually advancing in the area of towns such as Kamyanka, Kondrashenka, and Teshchenovka. On the other hand, some neutral cartographers note a Ukrainian strike contour, and according to certain mapping services, over the past 24 hours, during another push, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to penetrate the western part of the town of Dvoreshnoye. Based on this data, we have marked the map as a grey zone. We are waiting for some geolocations to confirm this information, but so far, nothing similar has been published. If we talk about the Donetsk direction, the front line here is gradually coming back to life. After a very long pause following the battle for Svatove, we received no news from the Donetsk direction at all. But after its conclusion, the front line is slowly, gradually reviving. First, Russian units stabilized the front line, restoring control over Shevchenko and Peshani. Currently, Russian units are completing the clearing of Lisovka, and new footage of the 25th Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces has been published, showing FPV drone strikes on the forward positions of the Russian army. Based on the footage, we have slightly updated the map for this town. Additionally, footage of artillery strikes by the UAF on Russian positions in the village of Kotlina has been published. Another small update in favor of the Russian Federation. Once again, pro-Ukrainian and neutral sources have begun talking about further advances into the town of Uspanovka. According to some pro-Russian experts, the Ukrainians may control up to 5 buildings along Shevchenko Street in the central part of the town. Also, according to some experts, including pro-Ukrainian ones, there has been a slight expansion of the control zone in the area of the village of Zaporizhia. And of course, there is constant movement in the southern Donetsk direction. Based on objective control footage and the number of various geolocations, it can be assumed that the Russian side has currently chosen the town of Rozliv as the main focus for strikes, where Russian drones are constantly operating hitting the forward positions of the Ukrainian armed forces. Additionally, the main focus of strikes is now on the village of Fedorivka, a small village located behind Vesely. Currently, the Russian side, as we can see, has established full fire control over the main supply route between Fedorivka and Vesely. While Russian units are storming the southern part of Vesely, Russian FPV operators are controlling all supply routes, preventing additional reinforcements from reaching this small village. As for the Zaporizhia direction, over the past 24 hours, there has been a slight advance by Russian units, according to some pro-Russian experts, towards Orikhiv and Novodanilivka, and on the western flank, a small advance in the southern part of Lobkov. Some pro-Russian experts note full control over Lobkov, while some neutral sources say that Russian units have only entered this small village. And that's all for now, dear friends. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and all the best to you.